Well, thank you folks for joining us once again. Welcome to Grace. Our study tonight will concern itself with our last days. This will be part two, maybe a part three. We'll see how far we get tonight. And as I said, we're going to have some fun with the idea of deception through the avenue of superstition. Is there any deception when it comes to superstition where we would be deceiving ourselves through our superstitious mindsets? Well, we're going to look at that this evening. So as you folks know, in our previous lesson, we took a more in-depth look at what I called the different battle tactics or battle strategies that Satan employed in time past in order to prevent the seed of the woman, which would be Eve, from being able to destroy him and to remove any possibility of Satan usurping the glory of God in his quest to be just like God as he announced his intentions in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. We also how God countered every move that Satan made. John called him the great dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. And again in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2. So we took note of how Satan was unwilling to ever submit himself to the one and only true God who had created him. Satan never wavered. He never waved the white flag as he was determined that the word quit would never be a part of his vocabulary. The question that remains is this: how is Satan working in these last days leading to the return of Jesus Christ and the rapture and rescue, we might add, of God's household of faith, prior to God pouring out his purging and avenging wrath on the God and Christ rejectors and earth? For the answer, we must look to the steward of God's household of faith during these last days, who gives us those answers. As noted at the close of our previous lesson, with sin taken off the table of God's justice, Christ having died for it, put it away, leaving belief as the only criteria for being justified unto eternal life, Satan's battle tactic today on the front lines of his war against God and those who belong to God is taking place in the arena of men's minds. Satan's fighting feverishly for the minds of men. We saw how he employed Operation Deception and Alienation in the garden, deceived Eve and alienation between Cain and Abel. Operation Agitation, Assassination, as Cain slew Abel. Operation Infiltration, Degradation, as the angels that left their first estate went after strange flesh. Operation Extermination, Elimination, as he tried to exterminate the seed line. And what was it, 5 or 6 times we noted how that seed line was taken down to one remaining individual in the royal seed line through whom the rescuer, the redemptor, would come. We saw Operation Corruption Religion as how Israel thought, suppose they could earn their righteousness through their performance. It's called religion in Scripture. Operation Subversion Temptation took place in the wilderness with Christ. Subvert the seed himself. Operation Possession Dominion, as the angelic host took possession, the demonic angelic host, the demons, took possession of men, and therefore had dominion through that possession. And we saw how God answered that as Christ and the 12 were casting out the demons. Then do away with the seed himself, do away with Christ himself, which was called Operation Crucifixion Elimination. So we saw how Operation Confusion and Comprehension is his tactic today. In the next one, Operation Intimidation, intimidate, first denounce the message and intimidate the messenger. Next, incapacitate the messenger. If we follow Paul, this is how Satan worked in time past. So God answered those. We know that Satan is fighting for the minds of men today as we're looking at experiencing Operation Confusion and Comprehension. So Satan's not going to give up. He's going to continue. He can't be everywhere at one time. He's only going to be one place at one time. He's not omnipresent as God is. But what can Paul tell us? Well, he gives us some answers in his final letter that he wrote that's recorded in Scripture, beginning in 2 Timothy chapter 3. But before we turn our attention to that letter, I want to once again give you a quick overall listing that our apostle uses to describe God's arch rival, Satan, during these last days. God is called light in Scripture, 1 John 1:5. Satan is transformed into an angel of, what is it? Light, 2 Corinthians 11:14. Jesus Christ is called God in the flesh, John 1:14. Paul called him the great God in Titus chapter 2, verse 13. Satan is called the God of this world in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. Christ is called the Prince of Peace in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Satan is called the Prince of this world in John chapter 12, verse 31, John chapter 14, verse 30, and John chapter 16, verse 11. Paul called Satan the prince of the power of the air in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2. God alone is to be worshipped. Exodus chapter 34, verse 14, Psalms chapter 29, verse 2, Psalms chapter 96, verse 9, Matthew chapter 4, verse 10, and Luke chapter 4, verse 8. God alone is to be worshipped. That's pretty profound. Satan sought Christ's worship in Matthew chapter 4, verse 9, when the devil asked Christ to bow down and worship him. Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. Satan is described as a roaring lion that walketh about seeking whom he may devour in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. God has his angels. Psalms chapter 104:4, 148:2, Matthew 13:41, 16:27, 24:31. Too many others to mention them all, so we'll just stop right there. Satan has his angels. Matthew 25:41, Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 and 9. God had given his words to Adam. Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, with the exception of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as seen in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. What did Satan use? Satan used God's words when confronting Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, when he said, Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. That's precisely what God had told Adam earlier. God gave his words to Adam. Satan repeated God's words, but then Satan took those words and convinced Eve that God didn't really mean what God had said. God has ministers according to the word of God. He gave his words to man. Those words are called Holy Scripture. And he intended that his words be taught by his ministers, as the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. The great counterfeiter has his own ministers, according to the Apostle Paul, who warned his readers in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, 15. Therefore, it is no great thing. Don't be surprised. Don't let this throw you for a loop. If Satan's ministers, also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness. There's righteousness that comes by way of performance, ours not. God hath revealed the gift of righteousness through his ministers. A righteousness is freely credited to a man's account upon belief and apart from performance. Many verses, Galatians 2:16, Romans 4:2 through 6, Romans 11:16, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, and Titus 3:5. Satan is teaching a righteousness through his false ministers of righteousness, and it's a righteousness that he wants a man to believe he can achieve by way of his own efforts. And Satan uses scripture, the law of Moses, as though the law was able to accomplish what Paul tells us it could never accomplish. 1 Timothy 1:7, Romans 3:20, Romans 8:3. I'm just throwing a lot of verses at you right now. If you need any of these verses, email me, Chris@yahoo.com, and I'll be glad to send you the system. God dwelt in a physical tabernacle and then in a physical temple when time passed. Pardon me. The body of Christ is God's spiritual temple today, according to the Apostle Paul. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 21 and 22, if I can get to cough out. Satan's going to sit in a physical temple that rightly belongs to God during the final 3.5 months of the tribulation period, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Jesus is the Christ, according to the gospel of God, John 20:31, 21:31, and Acts 2:36. When Satan and his angelic minions are in heaven by Michael and God's elect angels, midway through the tribulation period, Satan will indwell the man of sin, also called the son of perdition. So while God the Father has his Christ, the God-man, Jesus Christ, Satan will be offering his own false God, the Antichrist, a counterfeit God. God performed mighty miracles and wonders in Old Testament times. Psalm 77:14, far too many verses to include in this lesson. The God-man, Jesus Christ, and his apostles also performed mighty miracles, signs, and wonders, as described in Acts 2:22, 5:12, 15:12, 2 Corinthians 12:12, and Romans 15:19. The Antichrist, indwelt and empowered by the great counterfeiter, Satan, shall show great signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. Matthew 24:24, Revelation chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, and verses 13 and 14. So he's going to be performing lying signs. There'll be signs, and they will indeed be wonders. There'll be lying, the lie will be as to the source of them. It won't be God. Satan is the most accomplished of all characters, and he works his wiles in confusing the truth by appealing to the emotions of men, using the word man generically, of course, to mean men and women. This is what Paul was warning Timothy about in 2 Timothy verses 3 and 4, where Paul said, for the time will come, and I don't know if that's there it is, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears, wanting to hear what they want to hear, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned into fables, stories with no truth. In other words, as I said, wanting to hear what they want to hear. We're going to be talking about that a little later this evening, and wanting to see what they want to see, wanting to believe what they want to believe, things that appeal to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. What a prophetic statement by the Apostle Paul, by the way. Think of where that statement has found fulfillment in our day. Large meeting rooms with lights turned out, with the exception of spotlights turned off and on, and special strobe lighting for attention, of course, and accompanied by extremely loud music pulsating through the room, eardrum splitting and heart pounding music, and the use of smoke and mirrors with leaders and their own choreographed dance moves on stage to set the pace and further excite the emotions. That's what it's about. Emotions take center stage today. I don't know how many people would admit that, but that's true. You suppose that Satan has given up on mankind, that he's holding out the white flag for generation ages, and that he has no interest whatsoever in reaching the generation following ours and the next after that? Has Satan given up on reaching the youth? I'm speaking to the older crowd now. What have we taught the youth of our day about Satan's deceptive practices in their days ahead? What have we taught them about Satan's mind games and how to spot the counterfeit when they encounter it? It's not difficult to see how no doctrine and no doing fails to lead anyone anywhere. At least no one can yell hypocrisy to those who profess no belief and are not practicing what they're preaching to start with. In this case, they'd be not practicing what they're not preaching. On the other hand, what about those who do profess to understand correct doctrine? And yet with all that doctrinal knowledge, there's no practical living that coincides with that faith profession. I hope you understand what I'm talking about here. Not having all doctrine with no doing, all doctrine without doctrine we profess to believe affecting our daily living. Might that not set our youth in search of something better? Something that might work for them, as I've heard some express it. A religion that works for them. Think about this for a moment. One young lady, as I told you, and the daughter of the pastor where I was doing a weekend conference in a right division, quote unquote, church, said, I want a religion I can feel. If I don't feel it, it's not real. This was the daughter of the pastor, a teenager. If extolling doctrine without our behavior matching our belief repels the more honestly minded young people of our day, who have a perfect right to yell hypocrisy, would a lot of wonderful doing based upon incorrect doctrine be a better venue? These are questions we must ask ourselves, folks. Satan has not given up on the generation following ours. You see, it's not all that difficult to sing the words Jesus and love with no doctrinal foundation as the basis of those words and songs, but with the drumbeat of emotion leading the parade. Yes, we're emotional creatures. That's a good thing. God made us that way, and God knew what he was doing when he did so. But emotions operating apart from sound doctrine won't prepare anyone for what Paul had in mind in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 17, where he wrote that the man of God may be perfect, spiritually mature in that sense, spiritually perfectly mature, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. So apart from being thoroughly furnished with the correct doctrinal foundation, what might be thought of as good works from man's perspective might not be considered good works at all from God's perspective. Our youth need to see that what we profess to believe has affected the lives that we live, lives characterized by agape love. They need to see that profession and expression, believing and living out what we believe, line up. It's sad, but could it be true that when we learn about the liberty that we have in Christ and about how we are not under the law, but under grace in this present economy, that we are justified freely by his grace, that our standing with God's not about our doing it all, but solely about our believing, that we then might have a tendency to put our chips on the table, so to speak, and forget about commendation at the judgment seat of Christ. We're quite happy to grab hold of no condemnation, but are equally to take hold of that which will bring commendation at the judgment, where every believer will appear according to Paul. Does the witness of our lives match the profession of our lips? If we can say it that way. Young people can hear about the love of God from us, but are they actually able to witness the love of God in us? Can we have the tendency to get so caught up in our knowledge of correct doctrine, as wonderful as that knowledge is, that we become so puffed up in what we know that we adopt an us versus them mentality that takes precedence over the love of God that we show? That's something to think about, because that's a mindset that can be detrimental to our young people, who may begin to believe it's more about knowledge-based competition than it is about speaking the truth in love evangelism. Satan hasn't given up on the next generation, folks. I know you know that. In fact, I believe he's continually doubling down on his efforts to win them, and he's certainly not going to make that obvious to them. He's a master counterfeiter, as we've been saying. Paul told Timothy that in the last days, emotion would be trumping doctrine. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. What better counterfeit than to replace doctrine with emotion, than to have emotion perceived as in fact being doctrine? I'll know I have it when I feel it, is how that teen daughter of that pastor where I was conducting that seminar several years back expressed it. This tells me that Satan's attack on future generations will become increasingly more emotionally based, I should say emotionally charged, as he gives our youth something to feel and to live in rather than something to know and to live out. So being a master counterfeiter, Satan is a master strategist. Notice how the Apostle Paul depicts the adversary of God in his epistles, and you'll see how it's a mind game the devil's playing with mankind today. And he's particularly interested in winning our youth. By the way, these will be included with the list I mentioned earlier that'll be sent upon your request. Paul talks about the wiles of the devil in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11. He talks about Satan's devices in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. He mentions Satan's subtlety and about being beguiled by him in 2 Corinthians 11:3. So are you hearing the words here? These are words describing a mind gaming counterfeiter. Satan's efforts are focused on the mind today, our apostles telling us. Paul cautions about being taken in by enticing words in 1 Corinthians 2:4, and about Satan's tactic of beguiling in Colossians 2:4. He talks about being bewitched in Galatians 3:1, and about being spoiled in Colossians 2:8. Paul warns against being deceived in Romans chapter 16, verse 18, and Ephesians chapter 4, verse 4. And we see it again here in his pastoral epistle, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 13. Paul warned of ministers in disguise in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 15, and about counterfeit signs in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9. He's going to address that more directly in that second letter to Timothy, the letter we're examining right now. But Paul talks about seducing spirits, doctrines of devils in 1 Timothy 4:1. He warned of false apostles and deceitful workers coming in the name of Christ in 2 chapter 11, verse 13, and how deceitful teachers would be teaching another spirit, another gospel, and another Jesus in 2 Corinthians 11:4. Paul went on to talk about the winds of doctrine, the sleight of men, and about cunning craftiness in Ephesians 4:14. You can hear these words and you can see that the aim is for the minds of men. The attack taking place today is between our ears, folks. Again, Satan's attacks in this dispensation come through his transformed ministers of righteousness, and his target is the minds of men. Right here in 1 and 2 Timothy, Paul talks about profane and vain babblings, old wives' tales in chapter 6, verse 20, 1 Timothy, and again in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 16. There's too many things about the mind here to not realize it's a mind game with Satan today. Paul talked about evil workers in Philippians 3:2, and about how these evil workers will wax worse and worse in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 13, deceiving and being deceived, as they work within a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5. And he tells us Satan will be using ministers of righteousness in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 15. Hopefully you can see that it's a mind game Satan's playing on men in this present economy of grace, as his transformed ministers of righteousness play what we might call mental gymnastics with the word of God. And as we've just seen in these last days, deception is the battle strategy of Satan's battlefront. What we also need to know is that deception and superstition are joined at the hip. This is what I'm told that I told you that I wanted to talk about in today's lesson, where we're going to have a little fun. Do you recall Paul's statement to the worshipers on Mars Hill who were giving homage to the unknown God? In Acts chapter 17, verse 22, we read, "Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are," look at it, "overly, too abundantly superstitious." Now, the word superstitious is a long word in the Greek. Daisi diami monesteros. Daisi meaning above, daisi, dahi monesteros. The translators use the prefix super meaning above, and tied it to the word dahimon meaning supernatural or higher spirit. Is it possible for people to be fooled through the avenue of superstition? I asked the question in our previous lesson, are we superstitious? Can believers actually be superstitious in their reasonings? Or do we have a mind that's not, that needs to be renewed daily because our mind will automatically take us toward the superstitious? That's actually true. When we boil it all down, superstition can be defined as illusory, false, not real, imagined. And I'm sure you'll recall Paul's statement in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, where our apostle said, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds." What strongholds? Casting down imagination, strongholds of the mind, folks, in every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So we have three words that are linked at the hip: deception, superstition, and imagination. And do you see how all three can play into the emotions? Do you remember that the Jews that Paul spoke of when he said the Jews seek a sign? Well, think about those signs in the realm of superstition and imagination for a moment. The Jews were saying, if I see it, then I will believe it. I won't believe it until I see it. By the way, we know somebody made mucho bucks on that I will later. If I see it, I'll believe it. But the opposite is just as true. If I believe it, then I will see it. That is absolutely true. So let's look at that idea of superstition. I want to show you the fallibility of human reasoning and how we humans gravitate naturally toward the supernatural. How that ties with tradition. You see, the mind of fallen man tends toward the subjective rather than the objective. So let's begin with number one. And this has to do with the fallibility of human reasoning, and we'll go through each one. So making something out of nothing. When we talk about superstitions, we might immediately think of the common superstitions of years past, and sometimes the present. We've all heard of the common superstitions, for instance, the rabbit's foot for good luck, finding a four-leaf clover. I might have some of those on there. There you go. Finding a four-leaf clover, also supposed to bring good luck, as is the horseshoe hanging over the door. The ladder we're not supposed to walk under, that spells bad luck. The broken mirror, which is also supposed to bring bad luck. But how about the cross amulet? How many do you suppose there are that wear the cross on a necklace in order to bring God's blessings? There are those, believe it or not. Not in every case, of course, but certainly there are some who wear it thinking that wearing that cross will ward off bad things coming their way. Might that be making something out of nothing? You find a four-leaf clover and something good happens, and what does the mind immediately attach it to? The four-leaf clover. So when things happen, and we make something, but we make it out of nothing. Statistical analysis would show us that if we were to gauge those good things happening, it has nothing to do with something we just found. Might a person attribute something pleasant that occurs or something not so pleasant by automatically linking it to one of these objects? It happens every day, believe it or not. But let's take it a little bit further than that. How about taking too much from too little? Now, in statistical analysis, they would call that the clustering effect. But let's take a little look at the clustering effect. If you were to flip a coin and you see the X representing heads and the zeros representing tails, you can see that only 3 tails have come up and 7 heads have popped up. So if this happened and you were watching it occur, and boy, wow, those heads are just coming up way more often than the tails. And you were invited to lay a wager on the next flip, what would you be tended to do? Or what would you tend? You'd have the tendency to place your bet on another heads popping up. What's the odds every time you flip a coin? We might think, well, the reality is it's 50-50. The reality is it's just as equal and odd of coming up a head the next time as it is a tail. It could be either one. But the problem is if you don't have a large enough set and the heads are clustered in a certain place, you'll think that you'll say, well, it's either a weighted coin or the person knows how to flip it, but it's just a clustering effect. When you do a larger sample, now you see that the X's and O's tend to come out more evenly, even though under the first clustering effect, erase all those X's of white X's on the bottom line up to the green, and you'll see that that's exactly what we had in the first sample. But then with a larger sample, it tends right back to go to 50-50 odds. So there's another thing. I have it on here or not. Yeah, called the hot hand. Has anybody here heard of the hot hand? I won't ask you where you have to answer, but just think about it. It's very heavily believed in sports circles, especially in basketball. The coaches and the players, for the most part, the vast majority believe in the hot hand. If John is hitting almost all the 3-point shots he's making tonight, feed the ball to John because John's got the hot hand. But one team in the past, and it was the 76ers, took note, they were the only team that did so that year, took note of every shot made by every player during an evening basketball game, and from where on the court that shot was made. They documented every single one. And when they got done and it was put under the statistical analysis, were the odds greater if a basketball player made 2 hoops? Would the odds be greater that he would make the third or less that he would make the third? The hot hand idea would say, no, if he's made 2 in a row, he's more apt to make the third. But statistical analysis, when it's actually analyzed by looking at the statistics themselves, the odds of that person hitting his third shot are less if he's made his previous 2. Always less for someone who's made 2 shots to hit the next shot. And they then tried it out on every area of the court without a defense. Every player shooting from different areas of the court. And if you made 2 shots in a row, are you more apt to miss your third or to make your third? The hot hand effect says you're more apt to hit it. Feed the ball to John. He's the hot hand. But in reality, when those things are actually marked down, analyzed statistically, it's not so. Now, having proven it's not so, and different ones have come up since this major study of the 76ers, pardon me, many studies have been brought forth to try to prove that it is true. But each time, further analysis shows it's not so. But who can you not convince that the hot hand is not true? You cannot convince the coaches or the players. They still continue to believe in the hot hand. While an attitude, while making your 2 shots may give you confidence overall, that doesn't give you the hot hand. If the actual statistical analysis and marking those shots and counting them are true, there's no such as a hot hand. So, but you see how difficult that would be to denounce if that's what you had always believed. Many nurses in hospitals can tell you that more babies are born during a full moon. Many nurses believe that. Some don't, but many do. That on a full moon, there are more babies born during a full moon than any other time of the year. But is that so? Not so. Well, if you were a nurse, you might say, no, I'm in the room there. I know more babies are born on a full moon. But we see that that's not really so. The answer is no. A study of 50 million live births show no correlation between the lunar phases and birth rates. Isn't that amazing? Yet without the information, without the statistics and the analysis actually put down, you might tend to always believe there's more babies born on a full moon. Now, what would you credit that? What would you credit for that happening? Well, if you actually believed it to be true, And it was true according to the clustering effect. Maybe you witnessed it a couple times. But if you believed it to be true, you'd have to say, wow, there's some higher power somewhere, some source, something making that happen. Whether it's the cycle of the moon, the lunar phases, but something supernatural or super above normal is making this happen, that more births take place on a full moon when they do not. 50 million live births recorded, that are recorded naturally and then gone over. Who's heard, probably some of you have heard death comes in threes. I heard that when I first moved to North Carolina I was running a mail route on the mail route, learning from a person who had that mail route. And they put a flag up. They hung a big purple flag from the development where we delivered mail. And he saw that purple flag up one day and he said, uh-oh, two more right behind it. And I said, why is that? And he said, because death comes in threes. Didn't you know that? Deaths come in threes. And the answer is yes, they do. And they come in 4, 5s, and 6s. And behind every 3 will be 3 more coming behind. But it's not that death comes in 3. So if one person dies, 2 more have to die very quickly. And there's a long space between the next. Not so. It's been proven that that's not so. How many people would say death comes in 3s? That's superstition, folks. That's a superstitious mindset. In our minds, the human mind naturally gravitates toward the latching on to the supernatural. That's why the movies of the supernatural are so popular. People want to watch them. Ghostbusters, things like that. How about Puxatawny Phil? Oh no, it's February 2nd. He's going to come out and he's going to look and see if his shadow is there. And if he can see his shadow, then he's going to go back in 6 more weeks of winter. But if he doesn't see his shadow, winter's over and everybody can get on with their business now. But he's been doing that for years. And when you actually look at how many he's predicted 39% of his predictions have been correct over the years. 61% have been incorrect. So if you want to make some money, find somebody to bet with and bet against Puxatawny Phil. It was a great attention getter, and it helped the city gain some prominence and some fame just by bringing out a Puxatawny Phil every year, but has no bearing whatsoever on whether there's 6 more weeks of winter or whether summer's arrived. In Deuteronomy 18, 20, and 21, we read, but the prophet which shall presume to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or that shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die. And if thou shalt say in thine heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken? How will we know when somebody who claims that they've got a prophetic message or prophetic truth, how will we know whether it's true or not? How should we know? That's what there's asking here in Deuteronomy. When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously, don't fear that man. In fact, don't put any credibility in that man, because he's not a true prophet. A true prophet would never miss even once. Everything that prophet said, if he were a true prophet of God, would come to pass just as that prophet was told by God. But it's not true. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, and that if it were possible is a second-class condition, meaning it won't be very unlikely that would ever be possible. They shall deceive the very elect, but it won't be possible. So we're not supposed to fall for these things. We're supposed to have more doctrine in our minds to govern our beliefs and our actions and our emotions. So that's seeing something out of, making something out of nothing, the ladder, the broken mirror, the 4-leaf clover, and so forth, making too much from too little, the clustering effect. It worked. Puxatawny Phil came out one time and saw a shadow, and sure enough, 6 more weeks of winter. So you take too much from too little and say that he's got to be right every time. How about seeing what we expect to see? If we expect to see it, then we see it. Sure. How about the woman behind the wheel? Now think about this, guys. You don't have to answer out loud. I don't want you to get in trouble tonight, but if we see an accident that's taking place and we look over and it happens to be a woman driving, she's at the wheel, what are many guys apt to think? Well, that's another woman driver, or in front of us driving too slow. Then we think, wow, she's going to have a wreck because she's driving. It's another woman driver. Are women more apt to have an accident than a man behind the wheel? And you can answer that question to yourself right now, and we'll see how true it is. Truth or stereotype. Drivers are more likely to be involved in an accident, scientists found after analyzing data from 6.5 million car crashes. So analyzing the data from 6.5 million car crashes, it was assumed, I mean, it wasn't assumed, it was a fact that they found women drivers to be more likely to be involved in an accident after analyzing the data. But hold the horses, there's more to this. Studies show that teen male drivers tend to get in more accidents than teenage girl drivers. A study by the CDC in 2006 showed that the motor vehicle death rate for male drivers and passengers ages 15 to 19 was almost 2 times that of their female counterparts. So yes, when it comes to teens, but what would that have to do with? Testosterone, we'd say. That has to do with young men wanting to show off for the young ladies and being a little more careless and having way more accidents than twice as many accidents as their female young ladies. Men cause 6.1 million accidents per year. Women cause 4.4 million accidents per year. So looking at that, you'd say men cause more accidents. But wait a minute again. Men drive 16,550 miles per year on average. Women drive 10,142 miles per year. So when you take that into consideration, we're back to saying, no, you can't say women drivers are more prone to accident than men. So, but we do that. We see what we expect to see. And a lot of times we have stereotypes in our minds and we expect to see certain things. And we see it because we expect to see it. And when 1 or 2 or 3 of those things pop up as we expect, we say, there it is. See, I expected it. And that's exactly what's happened in that case. But how many cases overall? Number 4 is interesting, seeing what we want to see. You will see it if you expect to see it. It's the old, I will believe it when I see it. I will see it if I believe it. I will see it. Seeing what we want to see. Could that be true that people will see what they want to see? And then when they do see something, they'll make it line up with what they want it to be. I'll believe it if I see it. I'll see it if I believe it. That's the issue here. How about this? Oh, dad's had a new baby boy. Your son looks exactly like you. What do we expect to see? We expect to see something in that little baby boy that takes after his daddy there, don't we? But that little baby boy was adopted. Doesn't look anything like his daddy from a genetic point of view because he wasn't his daddy's genetically, biologically. So, but we can see that, and that's things like that have been said. Oh, I can see you. I can see in your little boy or little girl. When that's not really so. How about this? Anybody see anything in this piece of toast? Grilled cheese sandwich. This one took place several years ago, but I know many of you are familiar with it. You see a picture in that grilled cheese sandwich? The lady that grilled that sandwich thought she did. In fact, that picture was of Jesus. She said, there's Jesus, or was it Mary? I'm not sure. In the grilled cheese sandwich, there it is. And you think, well, who's going to believe that? But the fact is, oh, there it is. The Virgin Mary, that's who she said she saw, fetched $28,000 on an eBay auction. We believe, this is what the lady said, we believe that everyone should be able to see it and learn of its mystical power for themselves. Last week, Mrs. Dicer, the one who grilled the sandwich and found the picture of Mary supposedly, told reporters the sandwich had brought her luck, including winnings of $70,000 at a casino near her Florida home. Now, think of the truth of this and how ignorant this person must have been. If that was indeed Mary, a picture of Mary in the grilled cheese sandwich, and it brought her luck, winnings of $70,000, and she sold it on eBay for $28,000, that's a little foolish, isn't it? Seems like she'd hang on to that sandwich and go to bingo or whatever every single week and be winning millions. But no, she sold it for $28,000. So she wanted to see that, and that's what everybody who saw it wanted to see, and that's where they thought was in that picture. Here's another one. This took place in Clearwater, Florida, and it's in a stained glass window. But you can see an image on the right side there. You can see where the sun has hit the window in a certain way. And many people, you can see the shrine people were putting up because they said, that's Mary, the mother of Jesus, reflected in that window. And so thousands were coming, blocking it, and they all gathered around that window because what did they believe? They believed that Mother Mary was appearing in that window. And so you can see how people see what they want to see. And what did they want to see? They wanted to see Mary in that window. It was also the same thing took place under an overpass, seeing what we want to see. You can see the darker view there to the right and to the right side. And that darker view to the right side, they said, there it is again. Mary is now in the concrete, appearing through the concrete shadows. So they wanted to see that, and they made that out of nothing. In their minds, their mind conjectured that that was true when it wasn't true. This is all called superstition, folks. So that figure became Mary. And as I said, it was huge traffic jams and everything else. A steady stream of the faithful and the curious, many carrying flowers and candles, have flocked to an expressway underpass for a view of a yellow and white stain on a concrete wall. I believe is an image of the Virgin Mary. Police have patrolled the emergency turnoff area under the Kennedy Expressway since Monday, as hundreds of people have walked down to see the image and a growing memorial of flowers and candles that surround it. Beside the image is an artist's rendering of the Virgin Mary embracing Pope Paul II in a pose some see echoed in the stain. We believe it's a miracle, said El Bayatello, 42. We have faith and we can see her face. We have faith. They believe it, so they see it. Tuesday morning, women knelt with rosary beads behind a police barricade while men in work shirts stood solemnly before the image, praying. A police officer kept the crowd of about 36 from getting too close to the traffic, but didn't stop them gathering around the stain. This is the news at that time, folks. I remember that taking place. How about horoscopes? Now, I don't know how many people believe in horoscopes here and read their horoscope to see what their horoscope has to say about them. But you can see the different horoscope signs there around the circle. Is there truth to the horoscope? Well, I'll tell you, let me read a horoscope to you. I'll just take one and read it, and you tell me if that fits you, and we'll see if that's your birth month or not. You have a strong need for other people to like you and for them to admire you. At times, you're extroverted, affable, and sociable, while at other times you're introverted, wary, and reserved. You have a great deal of unused energy, which you have not turned to your advantage. While you have some personality weakness, you also are generally able to compensate for those things. You prefer a certain amount of change and variety and become dissatisfied when hemmed in by restrictions and limitations. You pride yourself on being an independent thinker and do not accept other opinions without satisfactory proof. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. Some of your aspirations tend to be pretty unrealistic. How many people would read themselves into that horoscope? But the truth is, it's one size fits all. That's not any particular sign. That's just a made up thing to fit everybody and anybody. Yes, while you might think a horoscope fits you on day one, it won't fit you on day two, but it's one size fits all. Whatever works for one will work for the second if you tell them that is your horoscope. It's multiple endpoints, it's called. It was my experience in my gospel drumming days with a young pastor who they said, wow, this guy's going to wow you because he's going to speak in tongues and he's going to call people out in the audience and tell them what's wrong with them, and God's going to heal them right on the spot. And so, not knowing beans from applesauce and doctrine, I thought, well, this is going to be something to see. I'm anxious to see this. But he told me later when I said, how come people stand up and say they're healed? He said, it's multiple endpoints. Listen to the things we call out. Somebody out there is suffering from what we call out. Have you ever heard of any of us guys who do this? He said, have you ever heard of one of us calling somebody up onto the platform with one leg and giving them their miracle by growing them another leg? He said, you'll never ever see anything like that. That's objective and not subjective. So it's one size fits all, and it's multiple endpoints. So they call out something. Somebody is going to be, when a group of people meet together, somebody's going to be suffering from something they call out. And if they're going to get their miracle by the degree of faith that they have, then if they don't get their miracle, it's not God's fault. It's not the pastor preacher's fault. It's their own fault because they don't have enough faith or they have unconfessed sin in their lives. So you can see how it works. And it's a huge money attractor as people want to hit. They want it to be the slot machine in the sky, and they want to hit when they go up on that stage and have God be the one that's going to cure them of whatever they've got. Seeing what we want to see and believing what we want to believe. Hypnosis, the placebo effect, does work. If you believe something's going to relieve your pain, sometimes it will relieve your pain because of your belief it will, not because some supernatural force is causing it to. It's called the placebo effect. Hypnosis is great for that. Ghost images and pictures. You've seen that. I'm sure you've seen ghost images and pictures before where you see an ad come out, something happened, and they've taken the picture with the camera, and the camera's got it. That's the ghost. Loch Ness fits that very well. Also UFOs. Yes, are there unidentified flying objects? Yes, but we automatically in our minds link them to Martians or little flying green men from way, way off that are visiting us and checking us out. So if it's a UFO, we identify it with life from outer space, where they've never proven life from outer space in any case, although we do know there are angelic beings. But I don't think the angelic being needs a UFO to maneuver around. There's the good luck charms, believing what we want to believe. We want to believe in hypnosis. We want to believe in the ghost images. We want to believe in the UFOs and Martians. We want to believe in good luck charms. We want to believe in police brutality, don't we? We're told there's police brutality. Is there? Absolutely, there's police brutality. But it's not the major overall police departments. It's bad guys in the police department, bad apples in the barrel, so to speak. So it's not all police, but what are they finding in the neighborhoods where they defund the police overall? They want to do away with the police generally. Well, they find it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and they need to take it back the other direction. And there's other things that come up the same way. So race and culture inequity. Is there race and culture inequity? Yes, there is race and culture inequity. But equality of outcome is different than equality of opportunity. The opportunity is there, but we can never guarantee the equality of outcome without having to eliminate the pride of doing a good job or the effort that someone expends to do a better job. But that's these issues are pushed. They're pushed across the board to achieve what somebody wants to achieve. How about this one? Seeing what we want to see. This accident took place not all that long ago on the interstate, and when the picture was taken and later shown, everybody said, there it is, that the guy died on the highway, right there on the highway that day. And that's his ghost departing him and going up through the trees there. So rather than seeing that there's light coming between the trees and seeing the effect of that, people automatically take it to that's a ghost because that's what they want to believe. And the mind goes toward what we might call the macabre every time it goes toward the supernatural. But the placebo effect is real. The placebo effect, what we believe can change what we perceive. The mind, the chemistry of the body is produced by the mind. The New York subway headache group, they took 300 people from a subway that professed they had a headache that day, 300 people, and they divided them into 3 groups, 100 people each. And they put group 1 in a room, they put group 2 of 100 people in room 2, group 3 in a room of 100 people, room 3. But they didn't tell them how they were going to help them get rid of that headache. And in group 1, they did nothing, just let the person sit there for the hour. Group 2, they said, we're going to give you a new miracle drug that's just been developed. Actually, it was aspirin with codeine. Group number 3, we're going to give them a sugar pill, placebo. It actually has no effect whatsoever. What were the results? Well, in group 1, where they did nothing, 20% said the headache's gone. 80% said they were still suffering a headache. So they did nothing. Group number 2, with the new miracle drug, 90% of those people, the headache was gone. But how about the sugar pill, which would have been no better than doing nothing, than the doing nothing of group 1? And the sugar pill, we should see 20% with the headache gone. What do we see? 55% the headache's gone, 45% still suffering. And they told that group they were giving them the miracle pill, the same miracle pill they told they were given in room 2. But you see, the numbers don't coincide because the sugar pill was nothing but a placebo. The odds should have been, or the number with the headache gone should have been the very same as the do nothing room, because that's what it was. And yet those people, 55% of them would have believed that that miracle pill, they were given the miracle pill. The do nothing group, the new miracle drug, and the sugar pill. 20%. I think I had just had that on there. I just had that on there twice. Mind body chemistry is important. When given a sugar pill in place of a prescription drug, an average 30% of subjects will show a positive response. Why will they say they were positively, that they had a positive response when they didn't know that it was nothing more than a sugar pill? Well, the placebo effect could play a major role. They thought they were not hurting as bad, so they weren't in their own minds. Believing what we want to believe, believing what we want to see, believing what we want to believe. I told the story, seeing what we want to see, of going home one evening. I lived out on a dark road, and I was driving my car, and I was headed home way after dark. And there was a group of people stopped standing alongside a chain link fence in the dark and staring. And I ran, got my binoculars. I wanted to see what they were seeing. I came right back to the scene and stood there. And it looked like what you'd see, a round saucer with lights rotating around the saucer. And they were excited as they could be. Look, somebody call MacDill Air Force, because yeah, this is a true UFO. We see it's right there. We can see it with our own eyes. I took my binoculars up and looked at it, and I said, you know what that is? That's the Goodyear blimp over the football stadium. That's what you're seeing. And as the sign goes across on that Goodyear blimp, that's what you're seeing. Those people were mad. They got angry because I actually told them what I was seeing through my binoculars, because they didn't want to believe it was a Goodyear blimp. They wanted to believe it was something supernatural. So that's where the human mind takes us in every case. How about believing what we are told? How about magnet therapy? I don't know how many people have tried magnet therapy, probably dozens and dozens and dozens, but they conducted huge tests with false magnets and true magnets in hospitals with people for surgeries to see if there was a pain reduction in the magnet. But we know there is a magnetic force in the body, but it's not ferrous, so a human magnet would do nothing to that. But researchers at the Mayo Clinic compared the effects of wearing magnetic or sham magnetic cushioned insoles over an 8-week period by 101 people with heel pain, and found no difference between the treatment and the control group. They took 165 patients in a random double-blind trial. 165 patients older than 12 years of age were randomized to magnetic or sham therapy upon reporting moderate to severe pain in post-anesthesia care unit. So devices were placed over the incisions and left in place for 2 hours. And patients were told to relate their pain intensity every 10 minutes. The magnet group had an average of 0.04 more pain intensity, 95% confidence interval, than the sham group. Opioid requirements also were similar in both groups. The active magnet group required 1.5 milligram more morphine than the sham magnet group. So it's just the opposite of what they thought. The people with the magnet therapy that were shams but told they were magnets could report a much reduced, because they wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe it, because they wanted to believe it, they believed it. Does magnet therapy work? Well, it works for some things. In the US, it was a greater than $300 million a year profit. Worldwide, over $1 billion in profit made over magnet therapy. And many people I know wearing magnets for reduced pain. And because they want to believe it works, the placebo effect makes it work for them. It doesn't really work in reality, except their mind is producing the effect, not the magnet. Believing what we were told is another issue. How about miracles? Believing what we are told. We've all heard it. We've all seen it on TV stations. It really went big, and usually they yell fire, and the fellow, the evangelist, touches the head or the person, or puts his hand on the head, and the person falls backwards. And then they've got their touch from God or their healing. So the arm is being used as a divining rod. It's supposedly the power of God is coming down through the man and out through the arm, because he doesn't have any power in himself. The power would have to come from God. What do they say? This isn't me doing this, is God. But what's God using? His hand to knock the person over, to make the person feel like they've been healed. But you'll never ever see them bring people with one leg up, or people who've been in war and had parts of their body mutilated or shot off, and they get up there and that evangelist does that, and then all of a sudden they have a new one. It's always wheelchairs and wheelchairs and crutches that are left in the aisles and stuff, but never do you see false eyes or false teeth. I used to have false teeth and false eyes laying everywhere because they were healed wholly in the Bible. They were healed entirely. God wasn't an ear specialist where he just went to ears and that's all he did. Out, foul spirit in the ear, and the foul spirit came out of the ear and the person could say baby. But it's a money maker in the billions of dollars, folks. And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of Christ, they sent out into all that country round about, and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole of hearing only, relieved of their back pain. They were made perfectly whole. Whatever they had, and they were of all types of diseases, gone. And they didn't have to go home and wait for the miracle to take place. For our light affliction, Paul says, which is but for a moment, well, it is on the Richter scale of time, our 70, 80 years here, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. You mean if we have afflictions, tribulations, troubles, God's going to take them away? Why would Paul say, no, they're working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory? So if we say, take it away, I don't want it anymore, take it away, we're saying we don't want it to work a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Paul said, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So what are we focusing? What are we aiming on today? Things that are seen. We want to see the miracles. So we advertise the miracle meeting, the miracle meetings. God's going to do these miracles. Now, is that to say God can't do a miracle? Not at all. God can do whatever he wants to do. He's not bound. Satan's not bound. So God's definitely not bound. God can do what he wants to do. But he's not allowing us to see what he's doing with proof that he was the one that did it. Why? Because Satan is going to appear doing all sorts of lying signs and wonders. And what are people apt to believe when Satan does that? When he calls down fire from heaven, people are going to say that had to be God. I had that said to me numerous times in auditoriums where I was playing my drums, where somebody would say, no, that had to be God. I saw it with my own eyes. That had to be God. Did it? Did it have to be God? Or could it have been the one doing lying signs and wonders? Would God do a miracle? Would Satan do a miracle, do you suppose? Would Satan perform a miracle if he was permitted? And he certainly was in the days of Jannes and Jambres. Would he perform a miracle if he knew by that performance that he could keep people in a false belief system and they would never come to the truth because they were staying where they could see things happening and giving credit to God for it? You've all heard of the boy who went to heaven and came back from heaven, Alex Malarkey, age 6 years old. Father was a preacher, helped him write the book. And I had a lady come up to me at a conference I was conducting in a Grace Church many years ago. And she said, have you read the book, The Boy Came Back from Heaven? And I said, yes, I have. And she said, what'd you think? Well, I think it's really takes after the boy's name, who supposedly wrote it. It's a bunch of malarkey. She was angry as she could be. Grace believer, rightly divider. She said, no, that's true. And you can't denounce it. That is absolutely true. That boy was miraculously healed because he said he was, and his father helped him write The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. There he is later, Carroll Stream, Illinois, and now 20-year-old Alex Malarkey, who in 2015 publicly disavowed the best-selling story, The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven, a book that claims he died and went to heaven, is suing his publisher over the matter. Malarkey says that the tale was fabricated by his father and is highly offensive to him now because it is contrary to the Bible and his faith. He's seeking damages and a complete disassociation from the book. And yes, they did. They did take the book off the shelves. Nearly 5 years after it hit a bestseller list A book that purported to be a 6-year-old boy's story of visiting angels in heaven after being injured in a bad car crash is being pulled from shelves. The young man at the center of the boy who came back from heaven, Alex Malarkey, said this week that the story was all made up. The book's publisher, Tyndall House, had promoted it as a supernatural encounter that will give you new insights on heaven, angels, and hearing the voice of God. To see how they sell it? It's all for bucks, folks. But there's a lot of folks who supernaturally believe that true, because why would a little boy lie about something? Said he sat on his on an angel's knee that told him to stop playing with swords because those swords were dangerous. Would they be in heaven if he's playing with one? He saw it was an uncle or somebody that had died and gone on to heaven and talked to him. And every time his father preached, when he was in heaven, whenever his father would preach, God would send lightning bolts down from heaven to the earth. And, it makes money. It sells books, but there's no reality to it. He said, I did not die. I did not go to heaven. He wrote, he continued, I said I went to heaven because I thought it would get me attention. When I made the claims that I did, I had never read the Bible. People have profited from lies and continue. They should read the Bible, which is enough. The Bible is the only source of truth. What a true statement, no true statement made. Anything written by man cannot be infallible. He concluded those who market these materials must be called to repent and hold the Bible as being enough. So at least he had the courage in an older time to speak out and say what was true. Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 and 4, I knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. God knoweth. Such an one caught up to the third heaven. So how that he was caught up into paradise, he says, and heard these unspeakable words, how that he was caught up into paradise is what he wrote, and heard unspeakable words which it is not lawful to utter. Who else said they went to heaven and encountered God? Muhammad. But he was telling all about it. He was able to utter it, but not the Apostle Paul. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, hearing what they want to hear, feeling what they want to feel when they hear what they want to hear. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. Would you say any of that's taking place in our day? Yes, I'd say it is. Pilots report seeing the light. They put them in a centrifuge and spin them around, training for their jet days. And they just before they pass out and lose all breath, they see the light, a bright light. How many times have you heard that bright light story from people? And near-death experiences, they call it. But they find that as soon as they stop the centrifuge and the oxygen can come back into the brain, the light disappears. So that's body chemistry. It's not supernatural things happening. Oxygen deprivation, body chemistry, drugs and anesthesia, pupil dilation, and hallucination are all part of those new near-death experiences. Agreement of others, the last one. We tend to think that if others agree with us, and the more people that agree, that validates the view we take. Do numbers make it right? Numbers validate the position taken. Can't tell you how many people have said with my teaching over the years, well, how many people come to your church? Well, we've probably got 40, maybe 30, 40. Oh, well, we have thousands. You can't be right. How can you be right when we have thousands that come to our church? Religious persuasions, about 34,000 different religious groups. So who has the majority? Nobody. When you take any of the religious persuasions out there today and add up all the others will outweigh that one. So who has the truth? All the others and not that one? The fact is, none of us have total truth. We're all working toward that all the time, but we have to be conscious of superstition and how it works in the human mind. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let that person to you is the mood there be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received from Paul, let him be cursed. So for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down, here it is, imaginations, and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing to captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So with that, we'll end this evening's message, and hope to see you again next Thursday night.